this will largely be a drone and air-based operation. And the scale of it, you can sort of put a cursor on by looking at other assets. So some of the air bases they might use include Cyprus with the British sovereign base areas there. The Americans have capability based in Al Udeid in Qatar. They have squadrons in Saudi Arabia, and they've still got the aircraft carrier to the south of the Red Sea. They're not going to put their aircraft carrier in the Red Sea because that would be a sort of sitting duck. The really interesting one is if you saw an outload to Diego Garcia, which is a British owned island, of both things like B-52 bombers or B-1, B-2 with the fuel retankers from there. So if you were going to have a significant campaign, you would look for those assets, long-range strike assets, for a sustained campaign.
British warship shot down 7 drones launched by Iranian-backed Houthi fighters in the Red Sea in the last few hours in an operation with US forces to repel the largest drone and missile attack to date. Today, Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, said action would be taken if these attacks did not stop.
Well, we do know that Iran is behind so much of, I'm afraid, the bad things that are happening in that region. And there have been reports, I've seen them on social media as well, about how Iran are providing effectively the eyes and the ears, the radar systems through ships and other things, and certainly the equipment to the Houthis who are using it to attack shipping. So we call on Tehran, but also directly on the Houthis. This absolutely must stop. There will be consequences if it doesn't.
Well, Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence and former senior British military advisor to the US Central Command, joins us now. Hello, Chip.
Good evening, Rick.
Good to speak to you tonight. Let's just go back a bit, kind of wind back and think about where we are. British and American destroyers have intercepted this barrage of drones and missiles fired by Yemen's Houthis at ships in the Red Sea. But how much capability do the Houthis have, and what do they want?
Well, they have a significant capability. So in global terms, we would say that what they're trying to do is they have an A2AD capability. That's an anti-access area denial capability based on coastal defense, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, unmanned aerial vehicle, drone waves, unmanned surface vessels or suicide drone boats. None of those of which have been deterred. The only thing which has been deterred is the sort of piracy swarm after the action of the Americans on the 1st of January, which destroyed 3 boats and killed about 10 people. Now, most of this has been there for a long period of time, and one of the problems in seeking outcomes to the conclusion of this is that there has been a war going on, Operation Decisive Storm, since 2015, when both Saudi Arabia and the UAE intervened after the Yemen effectively fell apart and really went back to its 2 parts that it had before 1990, that is the sort of north and the south. There were 2 different configurations prior to that. The Houthis actually are part of the axis of resistance, though, globally. The theatre of war really for them is to do with the Gaza-Israel action. Yeah. They're part of this unity of fronts and the Ring of Fire. And indeed, probably the most significant thing that's happened from there over the last 3 months is that Israel intercepted the first ever exoatmospheric interception of a ballistic missile. And obviously exoatmospheric means it was intercepted in the higher atmosphere, beyond the where planes fly. So that was very significant. Yeah, about 1,000 miles.
So they have that capability to fire as high as commercial airliners.
Yeah, and beyond that. That isn't the problem, of course, which confronts the coalition. The coalition are confronted by the objective of keeping the sea lanes open, because it is that which powers the sort of global economy. 15% of global sea trade goes through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, 12% of oil, 8% of LNG. And it's also, it matters because it's the longer route with the container ships means that you've got a reduction in network capacity of about 8%. And that has a knock-on effect of the flow rates around the world. And that will lead to some sort of supply chain fragility. They are international waters. Freedom of navigation has always been a bedrock of international norms. That's why it's important to the nations that are part of Prosperity Guardian, which is the defensive operation at the moment. But to use the baseball analogy of Frank McKenzie, who was the previous CENTCOM commander, at the moment they're in the baseball analogy of catching, but there is a time when eventually you might take a significant escalatory measure on a ship, and then you might have to pitch. And what he means by pitch is offensive operation against either Houthi capability or or the Iranians. Because the Iranians are not mad mullahs. They do have a risk-reward calculus on how they look at this. There is a precedent for this in Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, when the Americans sank 5 Iranian vessels, which effectively stopped some malign activity in mining of international waters in the Strait of Hormuz and effectively brought an end to the Iran-Iraq war in 1988.
So, Chip, what might that look like if British and American destroyers are shooting down these drones and missiles that are being, fired at HMS Diamond and other ships in the Red Sea? What might an attack towards them on land in Yemen or in Iran, what might that look like? How would that work?
I don't think there'll be an attack on Iran at the moment. So the first thing is, do you just go for an act of punishment, a one-off event which seeks to get back to a deterrence line, showing that you're going to do something? The problem with that, if it doesn't work, you're then into saying that you need a sustained campaign. Now, most of the ships which are knocking down the missiles in the Red Sea won't actually be used for any offensive operation. I think this will largely be a drone and air-based operation. And the scale of it, you can sort of put a cursor on by looking at other assets. So some of the air bases they might use include Cyprus with the British sovereign base areas there. The Americans have capability based in Al Udeid in Qatar. They have squadrons in Saudi Arabia, and they've still got the aircraft carrier to the south of the Red Sea. They're not going to put their aircraft carrier in the Red Sea because that would be a sort of sitting duck. The really interesting one is if you saw an outload to Diego Garcia, which is a British owned island, of both things like B-52 bombers or B-1, B-2 with the fuel retankers from there. So if you were going to have a significant campaign, you would look for those assets, long-range strike assets, for a sustained campaign. The difficulty is this, though, in outcome terms. We intervened and occupied in Iraq. That was a costly disaster. In Libya, we intervened and did not occupy. That was a costly disaster. In Syria, we did not intervene, nor did we occupy. That was a costly disaster. And it's always very difficult to say that, your progression from tactical objectives to keeping those sea lanes open is going to be successful. That's always why you have reassessment and reevaluation at all times as you're progressing with these things.
Does Iran have any pressure from nearby Middle Eastern countries to stop providing missiles and drones to this Houthi group?
I don't think so at the moment. You've got to really go back to the IRGC Quds Force, really. And of course, it's the 4th anniversary of the death of Soleimani. Now, it's important to understand that the Quds Force, Quds is Jerusalem in Arabic, and they want to see the destruction of Israel. That is not to say, though, that they are mad mullahs, and there's really 3 reasons for that. The first one is there are internal tensions in Iran with the woman life freedom movement. There are fragilities in Iranian society. The second one is because the Shia are a minority in the Middle East. There are certainly large parts of the Middle East, including, for example, Syria, where, of course, they have propped up the Assad regime, where some of the Sunni groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a sort of what we would class as a jihadi group, see their fight against Assad and the Iranians as a battle for liberation from what they see an Iranian attempt to wipe out the Sunni people and restore the glory of the Persian Empire. And lastly, there are centrifugal forces in Iran. There are ethnic civil wars which could break out in the peripheries of Iran, particularly because you've got a very aged senior leader in Khuzestan, Kurdistan, and Baluchistan. So they aren't mad mullahs. They will look at this in a risk-reward calculus. So if they can further their strategic objectives, which do include wiping Israel off the face of the earth. They
Yeah.
will probably always fight to their last proxy, but they're not going to fight to the last or first Iranian. They're very, very cagey about that. They don't want to get involved in the bringing the Americans into this. Although, of course, in terms of what they see as theatre of war at the moment, they are using some of their other proxies, including the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, to hit the Americans. Over 120 attacks there since the 7th of October, and the Americans have retaliated on that, with a view to getting the removal of the Americans from Iraq. Now, of course, the Americans in Iraq are there in a defeat ISIS mode, not a restrain Iran mode. And really, what this really shows you, if you look forward from the Arab Spring in 2011, is that the Middle East is falling apart, has been for a number of years, and it's very, very difficult to put it back together again.
Yeah, like you say, incredibly important to keep the shipping lanes open in the Red Sea, or all those ships have got to be diverted. And of course, the knock-on effect there is prices for us in our shops and even our petrol stations go up because of it. Chip, always good to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rick.
Major General Chip Chapman there, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, ironing out what's going on. That there is an incredible picture on the front page of the Times where you see military personnel in white, which look, I can only describe them as probably fireproof suits, looking out as HMS Diamond shoots down Houthi drones and missiles coming under fire in the Red Sea. Of course, Britain saying these strikes against the Iranian-backed rebels were imminent. So retaliation imminent, as Chip was also saying there.